Welcome, Brodies. I hope that everybody's having a good week and a great day. As you know, today is Earth Day. So I want to start by wishing everybody a happy Earth Day. I was doing some homework to learn more about when this holiday actually started, and it actually started on April 22nd, 1970. I just celebrated a birthday. I was born in 1970, so 52 years of celebrating this holiday. And I am so excited that I get to moderate this, what I think is going to be a fantastic conversation, thinking about environmentalism and intersectionality. And I want to just pause and also acknowledge the Sustainability at Broad Group. They've done a wonderful job organizing different events throughout this week. And so if you don't know about the group, you should try to learn more about them. You can contact me, the IDEA office, or I can point you in the right direction. But please reach out. They're doing some amazing work. Obviously, this is an important issue that all of us should be thinking about. You know, this certainly affects every single one of us in this room. And so again, I do encourage you to take some time to learn about this group, the things they're doing. And they're always looking for other individuals to get involved in ways to engage with the group. So again, happy Earth Day. And as I said earlier, I'm thrilled to be moderating this particular panel discussion on the topic of intersectionality and the environmental movement. We've got two great speakers that are here today to share your thoughts. And then we're going to have the format of the session is going to be, we'll hear from both of our panelists, have them maybe spend a few minutes talking about the work they do, how they think about this work. And then we'll shift into a Q&A that I'll moderate. I've got some questions, and I'm sure more questions will come up during the comments time. And then we're going to go ahead and move into a Q&A with you, the audience. And so please start thinking of those questions. Let's take advantage of these two amazing individuals, the knowledge and what they bring into this space. And so with that, I'll introduce our panelists in 1 second. But as I think about this, you folks know, as the Chief Equity Officer here at the Broad, I think a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think many of you also know that I'm a physician by training. I'm an internal medicine doctor, and have been on the front line when it comes to health inequities and health disparities and marginalized communities, and really thinking about the injustice that's out there. And if I'm going to be honest with you, when I think about the environmental movement, it wasn't until recently where I really began to appreciate the profound impact this has on our underrepresented or marginalized communities. I remember early on thinking, this is for a certain group of individuals, and it just seemed too broad of a topic for me to cover. But the more I started thinking about how this affects communities and how this affects communities of color, it became clear that there's so much more that we can be doing, so much more that we can be learning. And so what I hope that we can do today is really, number one, get us started on this important conversation, get us to start thinking about how we can become part of the movement, if you will, get us thinking about how we can start to create change in this space. Again, lots of great work happening, but we have so much more to do. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our two panelists. Again, we'll have a few minutes for each one of them to share their thoughts with some opening comments, and then we'll shift it into the Q&A section. So with that, let me pull up my notes here. I've got my back screen on. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Leah Thomas, who is an environmentalist with a love for writing and creativity. She's based in Santa Barbara, California. She recently published her first book, The Intersectional Environmentalist, which served as an introduction to the intersection between environmentalism, racism, and privilege. She is also the founder of an eco-lifestyle blog and the Intersectional Environmentalist platform, which is a resource and media hub that aims to advocate for environmental justice and inclusivity within environmental education and movements. And so for those individuals who are on site, I understand that we are giving away a limited number of copies of the Environmentalist, the Intersectional Environmentalist. And so if you are tuning in remotely and would like a copy, please fill out the interest form in the chat. All right, so again, we've got some copies of the book. I pulled it up and I was doing some skimming. It looks like a fantastic book that I'm looking forward to reading. I'm also going to introduce Andrés Jimenez, who serves as the Executive Director of Green 2.0. So Green 2.0 is an organization that describes itself as a group of watchdogs for inequality in the environmental sector. Additionally, Andreas has served as Senior Director of Government Affairs at Citizens Climate Lobby, CCL, and as the Associate Director of Government Relations at Ocean Conservancy. Andreas has a strong history of public service, having worked for New York City's Mayor Office, the House Judiciary's Immigration Subcommittee, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, and Congressman Howard Berman. His work has also included being an active member of the Green Latinos, as well as serving on the board of Comor Clinic and a member of the Green Leadership Trust. So if we can get a warm welcome for both Leah and Andreas, we're gonna open up and we'll start with some comments. Leah, I'll go ahead and actually start with you and maybe have you take a couple of minutes to talk about the work that you do and really kind of get us on the same page. But as you think about your work, how would you describe it and why is it important for us to have this conversation now? Leah.
Absolutely. And thank you all so much for having me. I guess I would describe my work as environmental communications in some ways. I studied environmental science and policy, and I think throughout my studies, I realized that a lot of people, just everyday people, find it difficult to understand climate information. So I started to experiment with different communication methods, whether that was utilizing social media or just finding different ways to meet people where they're at so they can better understand some of the issues that are facing our planet. Kind of accidentally throughout my research and school, I started to find that a lot of low income and communities of color are bearing the burden of climate injustice and environmental injustice and have been for a very long time. In the United States, a lot of this has to do with structural racism and where a lot of communities were historically placed because of redlining, et cetera. So I think there needs to be an increased focus on, yes, the future and the climate crisis and how it's going to impact us, but very urgently and very importantly, how a lot of communities of color are being impacted by lack of access to clean air, clean water, and other basic human needs. And again, I found a communication barrier within a lot of the communities that are plagued with these environmental injustices, maybe not even knowing what's going on in their air quality or their water quality. So I'm just trying to find ways to bridge the gap so more people can have access to environmental information and data, especially as it pertains to specific communities. And I guess through that, I started a nonprofit after I left my job at Patagonia. And it's been about 2 years, and it's been a really great journey ever since.
Awesome. Well, terrific, Leah. Thank you again for being here. Super excited to learn more about the work that you're doing and get some time to pick your brain on such important topics. Andres, I'd love to hear from you as well. So again, how did you end up in this space? And when you think about something like intersectional environmentalism, what does that mean to you? So go ahead.
René, so nice to see you. Leah, thanks for joining us. Thanks to everyone who's on today. Happy Earth Day, as you mentioned, René. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, Green 2.0, we're a 501c3 nonprofit across the country, really as a watchdog to foundations, to the environmental sector, nonprofits, because it's way past the time when we should be diverse as a sector. What is happening? Why is it 2022? And why are organizations, foundations, why are we not being transparent? Why are we having the poor practice of hiring a diverse field? What is happening and why is this continuing to happen? There needs to be, René, a culture change. Until there is a culture change in organizations and foundations in the environmental sector, we aren't going to be able to move forward. We're not going to be able to hear from those amazing backgrounds, folks on the ground who are having these horrible impacts of environmental disasters, of climate change. We're not going to be able to hear from them. We're not going to be able to move forward. We need to be pulling on as many levers at the same time to create change until we start seriously understanding that there is a systemic problem within the environmental sector around diversity. We are not going to be able to move forward together. And that is a real problem. So at Green 2.0, not only are we a watchdog, but we're constantly looking to add resources to the environmental sector that help give tools to those that need them. And we all need them, René. Every organization, foundation, Congress, the administration, we all need to have the tools, the right attitude, and the actual want to change to be able to do so. And so at Green 2.0, every year we're doing things like polling, we're doing things like our report card where we're looking at organizations and foundations and seeing, is there actual change? Are there hiring practices where they need and should be? Unfortunately, René, I think the listeners and those viewing, as well as yourself, know the answer to that, and it's no. We are way far behind. We're nowhere where we need to be. Why is that? We need to be pushing our environmental sector to do better.
Oh, that's terrific, Andreas. Thank you for that. And again, for folks in the audience, for folks who are in person, we're going to have some time for questions. But I think it's so important to start thinking about the things that we can do and how to engage. And again, for me, this is such an overwhelming space to be in. And so I'm really excited to hear about how you think about this movement and really ways for us to move forward and actually become part of the process, to become part of the movement itself and really engaged. So Leah, I have a question for you. So one of my questions is, what was your inspiration for writing the Intersectional Environmentalist? You dove into it a little bit, but I'd love to hear more about that. And specifically, what are some key things or things that folks should note when they're reading this book? If there are any important messages you'd like to distill, what would be some of those key takeaways from your perspective?
Yeah, so I wrote this book and kind of do my work for two reasons. I guess I would say one that's really important is just getting people to understand that communities of color have been impacted by environmental injustice in the United States and globally at really alarming rates for decades and decades and decades, and that this isn't new. This has been around since the environmental justice movement of the 80s and beyond, but because of racism and other things, people are not paying attention, and this is really impacting the lives of people of color globally. So I wanted to stress the importance of that because I've been in a lot of academic spaces, nonprofit spaces, corporate sustainability spaces, where people have really tried to deprioritize racial justice in the context of their environmental work, or even allude to it being kind of an extra complication. But when race is the number one indicator of where toxic waste sites and facilities are placed and whether or not someone will have clean air or water, it's not an optional add-on to environmentalism. So one is really just showing all of the data. I'm a numbers person, so just painting a picture of that. And then secondly, which is almost more important and my favorite, is making sure that people of color, people in the disabled community, LGBTQ plus community, whatever it is, can see themselves reflected in environmental education. So I brought in there's over 20 diverse contributors to the book, because when I was studying environmental science, I didn't have any professors who looked like me, but they're out there. I didn't have a lot of textbook authors who looked like me, but they're out there. But I want a new generation of environmentalists to really see themselves reflected in environmental history, so they can say, oh, I didn't even realize that maybe my grandmother and the way that she gardens, that's actually really sustainable, or my ancestors are also a part of environmental history, because I want them to feel empowered as the demographics of environmentalism are slowly changing over time. But oftentimes people of color might be the only in their classroom or at a nonprofit, but I want them to feel empowered knowing that there is a community out there and there are legacies of people of color who have always been a part of environmental history. And then for allies to see that as well, that whether or not our stories have been included in environmental education, they've been there all along, and that maybe in the future we can start having a more true teaching of environmental history that is representative of all the world's people and not just prioritizing a select few, because I think that will change not only with diverse representation and an understanding that people of color have always been there. I think we'll also have more comprehensive solutions to environmental problems that consider people of color and our livelihoods and legacies. So yeah, kind of a two-parter.
Yeah. No, I mean, so much of what you said resonates with my own experience, and as a physician and somebody who's been in medicine and healthcare. I think about the lack of diversity in medicine and other STEM fields. It's about being a physician. There's not very many of us out there, right? And so I think we see this across all communities, and it's just another powerful reminder of the need to diversify these spaces, the need to diversify spaces that have historically been white, Eurocentric, because certainly as these issues impact our communities, it's important that we're at those tables asking the questions, pushing for change. So it's such a powerful reminder. Leah, I was wondering if you could give some specific examples, and you said data, definitely it's about those numbers and the stats, but if we were going to talk about how this specifically impacts certain communities, any, maybe 2 or 3 little tidbits, stuff that we can grab onto, because I know this is powerful stuff, right? When I think about the actuality, but any highlights or any examples of how this affects Black and Brown communities per se?
Yeah, and I wish I would have brought my book, because I would have opened it right up and read everything. But I think one of the most startling statistics I found that propelled me to action was that African Americans in the United States, about 71% of us, live in counties that frequently violate air quality standards. And then I also started looking at kind of data that Dr. Robert Bullard, the father of environmental justice, and Hazel M. Johnson, the mother of environmental justice, discovered in the 80s, that Black and Brown communities, I believe it's like, and this was in the 80s, so hopefully this has changed, but about 3/5 fifths of us kind of lived in communities that were very close to toxic waste sites and landfills, et cetera. So I think something that's also really scary is that a lot of this data has been around for a long time. So if it was easy for me as a college student to play around with maps in my geographic information systems class and compare tree coverage and median income and racial demographics or whatever it was, if I could easily pull that data, it means that there are people within environmental agencies that are aware that people of color are having pollution burdens. So they're experiencing like 2.5 times the amount of pollution in their neighborhoods than they even cause, when white Americans on average experience a pollution, the opposite of that, where they're breathing in 17% less pollution than they cause in their neighborhoods. That's really concerning, and we need to do something about it because the data clearly shows that environmental injustice is very closely linked to both race and income. And I also want to preface that oftentimes people will say, oh, it's an income issue, it's not a race issue. But these are compounding factors. And there are many instances where there might be a community of color that's like a middle class neighborhood, and yet they still have higher concentrations of pollution, toxic waste sites and landfills, et cetera. And a lot of that is, like I said earlier, because of structural racism. So even though redlining is no longer a practice, we still see certain demographics concentrated in certain areas. And that's where a lot of that toxic waste was kind of diverted to. But yeah, I'd recommend checking out my book and kind of reading over chapter, hopefully it's 4, if I remember correctly. And that's the one that just has data. It's specific to the United States, but it talks about the Black community in the United States, Indigenous communities, Asian and Pacific Islander communities, Latino or Latinx communities, and it just has data for each of these populations. And there was a lot that I didn't understand or I'd never seen before, because I mostly focus on the Black community. But it was really startling, even just looking at Pacific Islander communities and Native Hawaiian communities and how much they're exposed to pollution. So it's kind of an issue that's impacting so many communities of color across the United States.
No, that's really important to hear. And again, for folks in the room, I understand there are copies, and so definitely get your hands on that book. And seeing the numbers, reading the stats, it's quite sobering and it is quite distressing. But I think is like another reminder of how much work we have to do. And I think a lot about my own experience. I came from Austin, Texas, and where the Black and Brown communities have been pushed to the east side, which actually has no trees, no parks, no space, and then they keep on getting pushed further and further away. And it's just another reminder this is happening every day in our neighborhoods across the country. So I appreciate that. So Andres, we've talked about this a little bit, but one question I have is, and you've already alluded to this briefly, but as we think about this movement, and historically it's been a very white space with barriers to access to outdoor activities and spaces. When you think about the obstacles, what obstacles would you say do organizations which seek to diversify these activities typically encounter? So what would you say would be some of those obstacles that organizations face when they're trying to address this funding engagement? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, organizations are facing lots of obstacles, and it's case by case. So some organizations are facing several of these issues. Some are facing just a few of these, but some of the obstacles, Renee, are that organizations aren't transparent, that organizations don't understand that they even have a problem, which is a huge problem. When an organization doesn't look internally, doesn't take a look in the mirror and say, how are we doing on these issues, on these critical and timely issues? What do we need to be doing? How can we be addressing? When you don't even have that wherewithal of understanding that there's an issue internally, that's a massive problem. Organizations sometimes struggle. They tend to think that the problem's too big, and so they just push it to the side. they push it off till later. They say, let's worry about this next year. Let's make this a focus in the future. We have other priorities that we're dealing with. So that's a big barrier. That's a big problem when organizations are saying, let's worry about this. Let's kick the can down the road. Let's do this at another time. Because for too long, that's what's been happening. We'll do this later. We'll worry about this later. This isn't our problem. This isn't our issue. Why should we be the ones working on this? All of these things lead to barriers. They lead to problems that not only hurt their staff, it hurts their mission, it hurts their volunteers, it hurts the environmental sector altogether. And so organizations must take the first step in addressing that there are issues internally. They must make sure that they're just not having conversations, but they're actually putting into writing, putting it into their mission statement, the need, the prioritization of diversity as part of their mission, as part of their core, and doing those things and putting it into writing and not just having conversations will really go a long way in making sure that even if some of the staff that's currently working on these issues now leaves, that it's in writing so other staff can come in and work on these issues. Because, you know, let's just say that Leah and I are working on an issue in an organization and we end up leaving and all we've done is kind of talk and have discussions around these issues. Well, if we leave and we're the ones, you know, leading the charge, who's to say that anything else is going to happen? But when you put it into writing, you are making sure that it's part of what the organization's values and mission is. And so I always say it's great to have conversations. It's great to bring in coaches. It's great to bring in consultants. But to really address the problem long-term, you must put it into writing and you must make it part of the mission and focus of the organization.
No, that's so important. And, you know, taking that thought one step further, as I think about the work that we can do here at the Brood, could you maybe give us an example of one or two of maybe an organization that's actually done that, or what that looks like, right? Because I think, again, you know, how I'd love to, you know, an example or two that I could then take back to our leadership and say, hey, look, this is what people are doing. Any examples you can share?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, for as many organizations that aren't doing the right thing or aren't doing it quick enough, there are examples of organizations that maybe stumble and maybe have some setbacks, but they're at least working toward the right process and the right mission here. They're working to prioritize diversity internally. They understand that they have a problem. So yeah, they might stumble, but at least they're starting to work. And it's okay to stumble. It's not okay not to work on these issues, right? Sure. It's okay to have setbacks. It's not okay just to ignore it and say, why should we work on this, right? And so when I look at organizations off the top of my head, you know, there's just a few that are really trying. You know, you have Ocean Conservancy, which has a program now around these issues. They've been doing the Ray Fellowship and leading the charge on that. You have NWF with Mustafa Ali and Colin O'Mara. You have Union Concerned Scientists, which might surprise a lot of you, given that a couple of years back, they had such issues, but they brought in a new executive director who was really focused on these issues. She's an amazing woman. She's a woman of color. She's taking this head on. She's looking internally, looking at the problem. She understands that there are issues and is saying, okay, now that I'm here, we know that there are problems. We know that we're not perfect. We know that recently we've had issues. Now, how can we address them? And to me, that's so key. Understanding, figuring out what the problem is and saying there is a problem. Now, how can we address it moving forward? But also understanding that things aren't going to change overnight. It's a long process, Renee. These issues that have been so, you know, Leah alluded to it, have been around for so long, since the beginning of the environmental sector. And they obviously haven't gone away. You know, they continue to stay. So they're not going to change overnight, but we need good actors in positions, in all positions, especially those in leadership, to start changing things for the better and making it so that, again, there is a cultural change to the organization. I can't stress enough that unless organizations want to change culturally, it will not work. It will be a wet Band-Aid that pops off if you aren't doing this for the right reasons and you're not invested in your employees, your mission, and your organization to do the right thing when it comes to diversifying not only your organization, but the environmental sector as a whole.
Yeah, well, and so much of what you said that resonates with the work that I've been leading and being in the DE&I space for such a long time. I think the fact that it takes all of this, but also this idea of this takes time. This is a marathon. You want to invest the time and the effort into it. But also, you mentioned people being afraid to mess it up or to stumble, and that sort of leads to inaction. But I think it's and one of the messages I've been trying to deliver here since my arrival at the Broad is we just have to put ourselves out there. We're going to mess this up, but if we come at this with the right approach, then that I think really is the only way that we can get started. So I'm excited to be able to sort of pull some of this content into the work we're doing and use that as a way to combine efforts.
René, do you mind real quick if I touch base really quickly on something Leah said that I thought was so absolutely important and key to this conversation, which is youth. It's youth. If youth can't see themselves in roles in the environmental sector, finance, comms, VPs, staff assistants, researchers, scientists, whatever the role is, right? If they can't see themselves in these roles, they are going to take their passion, their amazing background and knowledge, and they're gonna go elsewhere, and we are going to miss out. And by we, I mean the environmental community. We are going to miss out on so many amazing, amazing young, passionate people. So we absolutely need to emphasize just the need to be talking to youth, bringing youth in, letting them know that there is a place, a voice, because having a seat at the table isn't enough. You need to have a voice at that table. And so we need to make sure that we are creating spaces and safe and cultural organizations that are prioritizing a space for these young people today. So Leah, when you mentioned that earlier on, it just kind of really hit a note because it's so key to everything. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, absolutely. Thank you for echoing that. And I think it is such an important thing. And Leah, as I think about sort of my own approach to this space, I may have mentioned earlier that it's kind of overwhelming. It's like, where do I start? And can one person make a difference? So my question for you, Leah, is, for some, it can feel like individual changes aren't moving the dial in any meaningful way. How do individuals stay motivated to change their own knowledge, their attitudes, their practices, so that they can be more sustainable and inclusive? Again, this is so overwhelming. So any words of wisdom or tips to help keep us engaged, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Leah.
Yeah, so the question was, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so how, for some individuals that feel overwhelmed in terms of this is just, it's so much, like, can one person make a difference? The question is, how do you sort of motivate those individuals not to give up, I guess?
This is a really good question. I feel like it's something I'm trying to work on, especially because there's just so much doom when it comes to the climate space. But I think one way is kind of just showing people what they're already doing that they might not really, I guess to explain that is, so when I talk to my parents about sustainability, I like to talk to them about some of the cultural practices that we've already been doing that they might not really consider to be sustainable. So even the way my grandmother tends to her garden is pretty dang organic for the most part, which is a really good thing that she's doing for the planet. And like helping to cultivate, healthy soil, or even things that we did out of necessity, just because we were kind of a lower income family. Like we thrifted out of necessity, we mended out of necessity, and all those sorts of things. But just showing them like, hey, this is something that we have been doing for a long time. So if we're already doing these things without even realizing it, what are other things that we could do, and just kind of add on top of that every day. And I also really like to let people know that it's really about progress over perfection, because I think sometimes when you think about climate change, it's just such a big issue and it's very scary and it's very daunting, but letting people know that, hey, there's a global community that is trying to address this problem. So do the best that you can, and then kind of find your specific niche in the equation. There is a mentor of mine who once told me, like, every movement needs an accountant, because there has to be someone who's really good at keeping the books. Like, it's not me, but if you're naturally really good at doing those things, kind of apply that to the movements that you care about. And that's why I decided to write, because I'm really fascinated with communications and that's what I can do. And then I think it makes figuring out your piece of the puzzle a lot easier, and understanding that you don't have to be everything for the movement at hand, but using your special skills, for the movements that you care about.
No, that's really, really helpful. And again, on a personal note, I was just reading something about Earth Day, and it got me thinking about it earlier today. And it was overwhelming to think like, wow, there's like, can I really make a difference? And will my one little action make even small dent on this? And so I think, like with lots of movements, that can feel overwhelming, starting small and finding that one space to start can make a huge difference. So I really appreciate that. And I'm going to circle back on the comment around diversifying the space, right? So I think that's one that is very near and dear to all of our hearts. And, as I think about some of the strategies that we've used to diversify the health sciences, do you have any ideas, Leah, or strategies on how do we engage our youth in this space? Any tips or any suggestions? Because I do think this is an area that a lot of folks just don't even know about, right? I've done some pipeline programs for folks in college at my previous job at UT Austin, but I'd love to hear any thoughts as we move this work forward and think about diversifying that pipeline. Any tips or suggestions?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I'm trying to think about that. Yeah, representation honestly is so important. I know we talked about that earlier, but I honestly think one of the only reasons I went into STEM, I mean, I've always loved plants and animals, but I remember when my mom, she got my sister and I black dolls, and she got us an astronaut, and she got us a doctor, and my sister went to space camp, etc. And I remember when I thought, interesting politics, but I saw a movie about Ben Carson way back in the day, and about the surgery that he performed. And I remember thinking like, oh my goodness, there are Black doctors, there are Black scientists, I can be in this field. So I think one of the best ways to engage diverse youth is really just showing them the people who are doing this work. And if you're able to, like, even having events where you're bringing in people in the environmental and healthcare space and just learning about what they do, going to community gardens and things like that, and learning about the importance of carbon sequestration and healthy soils and things like that. I think that will really be a way to help get people engaged. And then also sharing the information in a non-scary way, but kind of showing how kind of environmental injustices like air pollution and lack of tree cover is also really impacting the health of our communities, because I think a lot of people don't know. For me, a lot of people in my family have asthma and respiratory illnesses, and I feel like it was always talked about in the healthcare world as, oh, this is hereditary, and kind of putting the blame on people of color. I see similar things even when you're talking about like food and obesity, even though many communities of color are living in a state of food apartheid where they only have fast food and not access to, healthy foods, etc. I think it's important to let children know this information about food inequality, food justice, air pollution, etc. Because then I feel like that will also propel people to want to act and be a part of the solution.
No, that's great. No, I love that. And I'm already thinking of other ways for us to connect after we're done. So I'm going to have to reach out to you and think about ways to partner. Back in Austin, before I left, I was at the med school, and we did lots of work with our diverse communities. And we started moving along this idea of geo-health. So kind of bringing sort of the environment into sort of healthcare. And there's such a gap there. So yes, I got lots of ideas. We'll have to connect afterwards. I love it. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and now open it up for questions. I know that some questions are starting to come in. And so I see one here in the Q&A that I will throw out there, and then either Leah or Andrés, you can take it. But the first question is, do you see a specific role for health scientists in this movement? Maybe particularly molecular biologists who usually think about human tissues, as many of us Brodies are. What kind of things should we be considering in our work, or what sort of things outside of our work can we apply our scientific skills to? So again, the question is really, how can health scientists get engaged in this movement? So Leah, if you have any thoughts around this, I'll let either one of you take it.
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts. So my environmental nonprofit, we are an education-based nonprofit because we're trying to find other means to get climate justice information and data out to the everyday person, and then we'll make it really accessible so anyone can understand. But I think we'd like to partner with more research institutions or organizations that can share that data with us. And also, sorry, I'm in Brooklyn, so there might be like lots of noises outside. But yeah, I think one of the ways is like sharing your data with environmental justice organizations, anything that might be pertinent to how our communities are being impacted, because we don't always have the resources to do our own experiments, etc. So kind of creating relationships where you can share, you know, what you're finding. But in terms of molecular biology, that's not my area of expertise. But I'm sure that there's a lot, you know, that can be shared.
For sure. For sure. Andreas, any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, just to jump on what Leah said, yeah, sharing anything, especially research, sharing and putting yourself out there that you're out there and you're interested and you're willing to and wanting to partner with organizations. A lot of times, if you don't know, you don't know. And so if organizations know that you're out there and that you're interested in working on this, that you have research, that you're interested in doing research on this, now organizations know. And even if it's not for them, organizations talk all the time in between to one another. And it could come up in a conversation that, oh, I do actually know someone reached out about this. And, you know, then let me point you in the right direction. Let me connect you. So I think that getting out there and doing some networking and letting organizations know kind of your interest around these issues is really a good first step.
Awesome. No, that's terrific. Thank you for that. And again, folks, we've got the Q&A section open. So if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat or reach out to folks in the room for those folks who are live and on campus today. So Andrés, while I have you on the screen and on my mind, what are some top priorities when you think about how to strategize, right? You know, like an organization like yourself or that you're part of, but what are some top priorities in how we strategize that could lead to significant improvements, say in government oversight of pollution or emissions or, you know, or in terms of the industry corporate sector? So I guess the question is really, what are those strategies to really start to change at that governmental level? Any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, for us, one of the biggest things is creating a space for organizations, for the government, for the administration, members of Congress to all come and talk. Because until we sit down as a whole, especially with elected officials, it's really a problem, because so many elected officials that we've talked to look at us and say, oh, we knew that there were environmental problems, but we never really even knew or even thought of the issue of diversity within the environmental sector itself. We didn't really think through that. We just kind of saw what we saw in the news, and that's kind of the things that we think about. So I think education is key. You have to sit down with government officials, elected officials, their staff, and really bring them up to speed. And that's what we do on what's actually happening within the environmental sector around diversity. And we do this, and it's helpful to do this, obviously, at the federal level with the administration, but we are actually also talking to local officials, state officials, working with the Conference of Mayors, for example, working with the city of Miami, just to give you a couple of examples. But the more folks that know what's happening, the more organizations and foundations and government leaders can really start looking internally and saying, oh, how can we make this better? So there are a lot of members of Congress, Representative Grijalva, for example, Representative Keechan, who are really pushing on diversity in the environmental sector and working on these issues. But we need more members of Congress, more local state officials. It's not enough to just have a few champions. We really need a deep bench. And I can't stress enough, Renee, this isn't and shouldn't be a partisan issue. This needs to be a bipartisan issue. The environment is something that we all are part of. It's something that we walk outside every day and see. We need to take care of it. It doesn't matter if you're Republican, an independent, Democrat. And so the issue of diversity within this environmental sector, we need to make sure that it's not politicized so that it's, oh, this is just a left issue. This is an issue for Democrats, right? No, it needs to be an issue for everyone, just as the environment should be an issue for everyone. We all take resources from the environment. We all need to give back.
Well, oh, you're right. That's so important. Oftentimes, these sorts of issues get polarized, and then it becomes a huge challenge. But you're right. This is about everybody, and really not losing sight of that. Again, it's so easy to get overwhelmed and so pessimistic in this space. But I do believe that we, you know, with the right energy and effort, that we can really make a difference. So it's good to be reminded of that. So there's another question that's come up. Let me take a peek here. So somebody reached out and said, so we know that both of y'all had the opportunity to attend COP26 in 2021. And so the question is, folks are wondering if you could share your experiences or observations of the state of the global environmental movement. Have you observed any changes, and what changes still need to be made? Andrés or Leah, I'll have you both share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think something that was really interesting coming out of COP is just that a lot of the international agreements are non-binding. So there are a lot of youth activists that are trying to advocate for any agreements that different international governments are coming up with are binding. In many ways, COP felt like an expo of sorts, and a lot of just kind of countries that were coming to talk about all the good that they felt that they were doing. But it was a really kind of exclusive event in some ways. I wrote a piece about my experience at COP as a Black environmentalist in Vogue. So you should check out that article because I get into some of the nitty gritty. But I think the best thing that came out of COP was probably just so many activists from around the world being in the same place at the same time, because regardless of kind of the inside of COP, where there's a lot of government officials kind of greenwashing and talking about certain things, the activists just naturally found each other, and there were marches and protests, throughout, with thousands and thousands of people participating. A lot of alliances that are being created with grassroots climate justice organizations from around the world. So that made me feel really excited. I also think the concept of climate justice is becoming a little bit more mainstream, even with different international governments. So that was exciting. People talking about the intersections of social justice and environmentalism. But honestly, I had the most exclusive badge in COP. And even then, you're still restricted from certain rooms. So, for example, when Obama visited, they had like specific tickets and only a few people could get in. So it's hard to know because I wasn't in some of those negotiating spaces.
Leah, what happened? We didn't bump into each other at COP. We'll have to make sure to do that at some point. But to focus on kind of the best part of what came out of COP around these issues, just the community forums and the community engagement that was allowed in Scotland, seeing folks like amazing leaders like Reverend Yearwood like push over a trash can and stand up and talk and have a megaphone, and just seeing so many youth outside talking to one another, folks really getting to know, networking, sharing ideas. That was awesome. One of the things that I constantly heard, whether it was at some of these dinners or events or networking or just on the street or coffee shop talking to folks, was folks from all over the world acknowledge that they all have issues when it comes to diversity, whatever country that they're in their environmental sector, in their space. They all acknowledge that they need to work on it. Some folks really said, in my country, we're nowhere near even where you are in the United States as far as addressing and kind of the highlighting of these issues publicly. And so, it was great to be able to share information, share stories, share kind of the work we're doing and hearing about the work that others are doing in other countries, or the lack thereof, because it's always interesting and important to understand what's happening elsewhere. And so just coming together, having those conversations, learning from one another, I thought that was one of the best things that came out of COP, especially around the issues of diversity, prioritizing, talking about these critically important issues.
Great. And somebody actually put a link to Leo's commentary in Vogue in the chat box. And so please take a look for those who are online and read it when you get a chance. Another question that's coming, let's see, let me pull it up. And for folks who don't know, COP26, I had to look it up, is it's the UN Climate Change Conference, which was in Glasgow last year. And so again, sounds like it was an amazing experience. And I think the power of community, every time I go to, obviously not that meeting, but other meetings with different DEI speakers and faces, it's just nice to feel the power of community. And oftentimes I leave those experiences empowered, enthusiastic, and optimistic about the changes. So with that in mind, any thoughts around what you're most excited about and optimistic about in the environmental justice or the EJ space. You know, whether it's a new policy or maybe a new conservation milestone or new technologies or innovation. What's got y'all excited? You know, again, in this space where so much of this is scary and overwhelming, I need some hope. So anything that y'all are holding on to or that's really exciting you in this space. Andreas, I'll start with you.
Sure, I'm really excited about, you know, our report card that comes out this October. We're now looking at 80 environmental organizations per year. We're looking at over 25 foundations and really doing a deep dive saying, where are you? What does your board look like? What are your hiring? What's going on with your hiring? Are you being transparent? Like, it's all of these important things that we all need to know. So I'm really excited about our annual report. We're about to push out some national polling around the issues of diversity. And so I think that that's going to be really exciting. We've got some things in the works around salary and the importance of looking and making sure that we all are receiving and have fair salaries. So those are some really exciting things. I'm excited about all the amazing books, Leah, that have come out recently around these issues. I'm excited about how youth has reacted and how we've empowered and engaged youth to actually have a voice on these issues, because it's really important. It's fantastic to have so many amazing folks who have built the path to where we're at, but it's really, really important for us to make sure that we're building that next path and making sure that we have that next round of generational leaders to continue this important work, because unfortunately it's not going to be solved in a day. And so we need to make sure that we have amazing people who are willing to do this work, even after some of the folks that have been doing it are either retired or resting. So really excited about youth, really excited about all the amazing things, really excited about how social media has been such a great outlet to really push some of these issues out. You know, obviously Leah's doing an amazing, fantastic job. You have also some amazing, wonderful folks on doing things either on Twitter or on Instagram. And so I think we're using those tools in a really good way. And so just excited about what the future might hold.
Leah, how about you? What are you optimistic or most hopeful about in this space?
I would say coalition building. I think I'm seeing a lot of people kind of creating their own organizations, writing their own books. It's not just me. There's so many of my friends who are coming out with books soon, like Dr. Raywyn Grant, who's this amazing black bear conservationist. She's coming out with a book and teaching a class on decolonizing conservation. A friend of mine, Queer Brown Vegan online, is talking about veganism through the perspective of, you know, communities of color. So I feel like this is only the beginning. There's so many things that I know that are in the works that are really challenging what environmentalism can look like. There's new organizations that are popping up every day. There's one called Hike Club, which I really like. That was kind of inspired by some other orgs that I adore, like Latino Outdoors and Outdoor Afro. Like, people are, you know, not waiting for a seat at the table anymore, and they're creating their own table and they're working with other communities. I love to see kind of support from different communities of color that are finding solidarity with each other. So that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, no, that's really terrific. And in your comments, you got me thinking about you know, other groups. And talk a lot about you know, the impact of climate change on Black and Brown communities. You know, we know there's so much data there, but any thoughts, or can you give us some examples on how this spills into some of our other marginalized communities? So we talked about, for example, the LGBTQIA communities, who often experience disproportionate amounts of harassment and aggression, all the, you know, all the health disparities and health inequities, or individuals from the accessibility community. Any examples on how this affects those communities? Because it'd be nice for us to, again, appreciate. I know my normal tendency is to go to one group and then be like, oh, it's about race or ethnicity, but it's about so much more. So Leah, I'd love your thoughts on how to make sure that we think about how this applies to all groups. It's so easy for us to get very kind of tunnel vision if we're not careful.
Yeah. So a dear friend of mine, their name is Patty Gonia. They are an outdoor drag queen advocate. And they work with a lot of LGBTQ plus outdoor advocacy organizations. And I'm an ally to this community, but not a part of it. But I didn't even really notice or realize that there has been a history of people who are in the LGBTQ plus community kind of being excluded from a lot of outdoor groups. So whether we're talking about the Boy Scouts, etc., because there has historically been a lot of homophobia when it comes to outdoor recreation, etc. So this isn't specific to environmental injustice, but outdoor equity and just making sure everyone feels safe and comfortable outside. So there are a lot of organizations like Brave Trails and things like that are trying to empower people from the LGBTQ plus community to build community so they feel as though they can safely go out and explore nature. So that's something that I've been learning about for a really long time, and barriers for people wanting to go outdoors and kind of experience that. And then accessibility, when I was a park ranger intern for a little bit, I learned a lot about how a lot of national parks or outdoor spaces are not accessible for all people. A lot of trails are not accessible for all people. So there are people within the disabled community that feel like they have barriers from being able to, again, experience all that Mother Nature has to offer. And then when we talk about disability, again, this is really important in the context of environmental injustice, because if there are more natural disasters or other things like that, there have to be really thorough kind of evacuation procedures and different things like that. And a lot of people who have accessibility concerns, that's extra troubling because there's already a lot of kind of eco-ableism. So that's something that people are talking about right now, where even within the environmental community, a lot of things are just not accessible to people who have disabilities. And when it comes to climate change and climate preparedness, it's really important to make sure that people within the disabled community are also able to find resources to be able to be, safe if there are natural disasters or other things with climate change.
That's great. No, that's I'm taking some notes here. I got to go read about eco-ableism and Patagonia. I just put a link to an intro in one of the magazines of who Patagonia is. And thank you for that. And again, it's so important to hear about how this affects individuals from so many different communities. So I really do appreciate that. So we've got another, I'd say, a couple of minutes. If folks have any Q&A or any questions from the audience, I'd love to see if anybody who is on site has any questions. Liz, anybody on site have questions for our panelists?
Nothing that I've seen on my end, but maybe Russell can let us know if so.
Renee, while you wait on see if there's any more questions, you mind if I touch a little bit on a question from a little bit earlier, as you mentioned, and you were talking about kind of how do we engage and how do we talk to youth, because that's such an important piece of it. And I just had a couple of thoughts around that. And really, let's go to them. Let's not even wait for them to be to come to us, to the environmental sector. Let's start off in elementary schools. Let's have community leaders, environmental community leaders, talk to youth. Let's have them go into schools. Let's have them, let's get them excited at an early age. Let's make sure that when they're in college, their schools, whatever, whether it's, political science or whatever, let's make sure that our professors, our universities are showing that there is a path and that they are encouraging, especially diverse students to enter this field. Let's really make sure that organizations and foundations are not only giving folks opportunities with internships and fellowships, but that they're paid fellowships and internships. There is no reason why organizations and foundations shouldn't be paying their interns and fellows right now. It's never been a good practice. Green 2.0 has a fellowship. We pay our fellows who are with us for 3 months. We pay them what I think is a very good stipend. It can always be better, but we do pay our fellows because I've always said, whether I was at Ocean Conservancy or Citizens Climate Lobby or now at Green 2.0, I would rather not have an internship or fellowship program if we're not paying folks, because they deserve to be paid for their time. They shouldn't be paying. They shouldn't be paying to do an internship or fellowship. They shouldn't be paying to go to work. We need to make sure that we're giving them resources so that we can give them, for example, Metro cards, that we're giving them time during the day to to go out to lunch and take a walk, we need to make sure that we're checking in on them, not only on the work they're doing, but making sure that we're actually setting them up for success, that we're asking them the kind of questions. What are you planning on doing next? How can we help? What can we be doing as an organization or foundation to make sure that you stay within this environmental sector, that your passion continues, and that we're being a helpful part of your journey, not just that we're using you for your time and your skills and we'll see you later. We need to absolutely be investing in the future. And that starts with making sure that we're giving opportunities to young, passionate individuals.
Thank you for that, Andreas. I think it's so important, and as we think about these opportunities, to make sure that we do compensate and that we do sort of raise this to the level that it deserves to be risen to by supporting these experiences, by making sure folks really understand the need, but also compensating appropriately to push people into space. I mean, that's obviously an important part of this, and something important to understand. So I appreciate you acknowledging that truth. Let's see, Russ, any questions from the audience in the space on campus? We've got another couple of minutes here.
No, not that I see here. Thank you.
No, okay. Well, all right. So in the last couple of minutes, any thoughts on, or any suggestions for both Andreas and Leah on where folks can go to learn more? So Leah, obviously your book is a great next step, and I'm gonna go buy it when we're done here and then start looking at it over the weekend. But where else can I point folks to? Where else would you say, hey, here's some important kind of essential reading in this space? If you maybe have one or two suggestions, that'd be really great for folks to be able to take note of and maybe dive into when they've got some time.
Yeah, I would say I don't want to plug my book too much, but in the back of the book, there's like a toolkit which has some of my favorite articles and podcasts and research papers and books and things like that. So that's in the back of my book. Also, my organization, Intersectional Environmentalist, we kind of have a database of a lot of organizations you can support, things you can read, etc. But one of my favorite books, I'm trying to think, there's one called Black Nature. It's a collection of nature poems. I just really enjoy that one, but check out my book and check out that book.
All right, that's fantastic. Andres, how about you?
Yeah, I would say one of the things you can do, and I alluded to this earlier, was this whole idea of education and how we need to be educating. You need to be educating yourself as well. Check out diversegreen.org. because we have tons of amazing reports, whether it's a report card, whether it's, our reports around retention. Definitely very interesting reads. I think that you'll find that, not only does some of our older reports and newer reports all make sense today, but, you'll see a running theme, and that running theme continues to be, yes, organizations are adding diversity at specific levels. What happens as we look at diversity when it comes closer to leadership? The higher up we look at diversity within organizations and foundations, the less diversity we see. And so many organizations that talk about the importance of prioritizing diversity, how much they care about diversity. I always do one thing when I'm talking to some of these leaders, Renee, is while they're talking, I'm looking at their website, I'm looking at their leadership page. Guess what? That tells a much different story a lot of the time than what they're telling me as this is happening, right? So many organizations we care and it's part of our mission, and we are prioritizing this, and I go to the website and I go to the leadership page, and yeah, there's no diversity at all. What's that about? And it's happening too often. The changes within organizations and foundations are happening, yes, but again, not at the leadership level. And that's a major problem. And this is something that obviously has been happening for too long. So go to diversegreen.org, read about it, read Leah's book, educate yourself, educate others. And yeah, I think that you'll find that there's a lot of change that still needs to happen.
And I appreciate that. And that's, as I've been in the DE&I space for such a long time, you're right. We see efforts, but once the higher up you go, the less diverse it becomes. And I think it really plays to so many important issues, but certainly creating, cultivating that pipeline, engaging folks early on, but pulling them all the way through, making sure that they get the resources to succeed and thrive and not, go off the trajectory. But I do appreciate that. So there was one last question I slipped in. It's a beefy one. I know we've only got a minute, but I'm going to throw it out there and see if folks have any thoughts about it. So the question is, thinking about the role thinking about the role of for-profit companies in our society, what have you seen as an effective way to advocate for investment in environmental movements, particularly in communities that have previously been excluded? So again, in the for-profit sector, what have you seen as effective ways to advocate in these movements, especially in those communities that have been excluded?
For-profit companies can be investing on the ground efforts. They can be looking at what do organizations that have folks on the ground, can they invest money there? Can they invest in money in projects? Are there new projects that can be started up with the money from these for-profits? The money needs to go to organizations that are run by people of color, for people of color, and we need to make sure that the money goes there, because for too long, these organizations have been having so many problems getting the funding that they need to actually make change.
Leah, any thoughts or any other suggestions on that question?
No, I completely agree. I think one of my favorite programs we did was with a tea company called Tazo, where we are a small climate justice organization, but we wanted to pay everyone at least $21 an hour. We needed help, we needed interns, we needed fellows. So they helped support the salaries, so the living wages of about 8 interns of color that were able to work with us. And it was just a really cool way to demonstrate kind of resource redistribution, because we wanted to pay people, we wanted to build our org, we wanted to create change, but we didn't have the funding to do so. And through that program, we were able to make all of those things happen.
Great, terrific. Well, I know we're at time. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Leah and Andrés, thank you so much for this. It was really a wonderful conversation. Again, for folks that are online, there is a link in the chat box if people want a copy of the book. We are providing it, so fill out that form and we'll make sure we get a copy of Leah's book to you. And I got to end with one final thought. So if there was something that we could do as an individual, Leah, what would be your big take-home point? Again, I might just give you one little nugget that I walk away with.
I don't know, it's kind of hard, but just that the protection of people can't be separated from the protection of the planet. I think that's just something to just think about over and over again, because we know that humans largely cause the climate crisis. So if we can make that connection, we can also make the connection that our environmental advocacy should include the protection of humans, especially the humans who are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis and have been excluded. So it's Earth Day. I wrote another article that I shared on Instagram about all of my environmental heroes who are Black women. Learn about them, learn about people of color in this space, and yeah, have a good Earth Day.
Andrés, one nugget. Give me one tip to walk away with.
Use social media to push things out, reports, information you find valuable, things you want others to learn about and read. So use social media. Use your time when you're sitting outside on a nice day to retweet or look at an article and learn something new. Educate yourself, educate your friends, educate others, and like Leah said, have a happy Earth Day.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. This was awesome. I appreciate you so much, and everybody have a great weekend. Thank you to Sustainability Up Road for pulling this together. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.